Last Sunday, I was down in Lakeside Kids teaching them all about Jesus. Last Sunday, we were talking about Christmas, and as part of a conversation about Christmas, we went to favorite Christmas movies, and the movie Elf came up. And for anyone who's seen Elf, there's a certain scene where he eats pancakes that are covered with all sorts of weird stuff. I'm not even going to start to list because it makes me a little queasy. But after talking about the movie and the scene, we all started talking about what our favorite toppings are. Most of them said syrup. I said peanut butter and syrup combined on a pancake is so good, but they all got a little grossed out by that idea for whatever reason. But we were just talking about syrup and how syrup is so good on pancakes. And all this talk about pancakes and syrups, it brought me back to the time when I was interning at Sky Lodge Camp in winter/early spring 2019. And over the years, I developed a few really good relationships with some of the older staff members there. And I was able to enjoy really beneficial times of mentorship with them. And one of them was with a guy named Tyler. Now, if you ever met Tyler, which probably none of you have, he makes me look small. He is just this giant beast of a man who, if you saw him in the woods at night, you'd think it might have been Bigfoot. He was a large man with a huge beard, a great personality, great laugh, and one of the kindest hearts I've ever met. And as my internship was getting closer to ending, college started to loom in the near future. And it was during this time that I had several different options to think through. First of all, I could have just stayed on at camp full-time, stayed there. I probably would still be there at this point, and just join their full-time staff, work with them, stay at the place that I love. Second, I could have gone to Northern Illinois University. It was only about a half hour from my parents, and I got accepted into their psychology department there. And I could have gone on to be a counselor or a therapist or wherever that path would have led. Third choice was I could have gone to the school where my sister went, Greenville University, down in Southern Illinois, and gone for music and played on their soccer team. And I got accepted on their esports team, which might be nerdy for me to say from the stage, but I was good at Super Smash Brothers. Or I could go to Emmaus Bible College to pursue educational ministries. And at this point, I was genuinely going back and forth literally every day. Over lunch, these conversations were happening, and I had no idea what the fall was going to hold. And it felt like every day I had a different path for my life. And Tyler heard me talking about these options and going back and forth. One night, he invited me over to his house to help him make syrup. Tyler had been tapping all the trees at camp. He was getting all the sap, and he needed to start the actual cooking process. So I went over to Tyler's house, and we sat in his garage, which is one of the most Wisconsin things you can do, sit in someone's garage in the middle of the night making syrup. And we were there just for several hours, because for anyone who knows how to make syrup, my example might be slightly off, and I apologize for that, but it takes a long time, and there's a lot of steps to it. And while we were there were two major topics we talked about. First, we're making syrup, so he's going to teach me how to make syrup. Syrup is a 5-step project, if I'm remembering correctly. And first, you have to prepare for the season during summer. You have to get your supplies ready. You have to figure out how much you're going to make, what supplies you're going to need, when you're going to do it. You're going to need to figure out when to tap based on the weather conditions and how the trees are looking. And then you have to identify which trees you want to tap, and tap them. If you don't know what that is, you stick a thing in the tree, and then the sap just kind of pours out on its own. And then that leads to collecting the sap in these big buckets, which then you process it, you boil it, you evaporate out the water, you strain out the impurities, and then to finish it, you have to filter it to make sure it's pure, and then you have to pack it so that you can give it away to people or sell it or do whatever you want to do. Syrup is a long process. It's not something that happens overnight. Again, this started in the summer for Tyler, and now it's late spring, and we're finally finishing this process. It isn't something that we could just throw together. And to get good syrup, you have to know what you're doing, and you have to actually take the time to do it well. I would probably mess it up at this point. It's been a few years. But it's a long process, and it takes a lot of time and effort. And after we finished that, and he showed me what we were doing and why we were sitting around this big silver thing boiling syrup, we talked about my future, and we talked about where I wanted to go. We talked about what I wanted from life, what my dreams, what my goals, what my aspirations were, and where I felt called to go. We talked about how to get to where I wanted to go. And Tyler related it to our conversation about syrup. He talked about how what I wanted and why I kept getting confused was I just wanted the syrup. But I wasn't thinking about all the steps and all the effort it took to get there. I couldn't get there by luck or by chance. I had to have a plan. I had to prepare, and I had to put in the effort to get to that finished syrupy goodness. And it was through this conversation that I realized I wanted to go into ministry, and so then I finished my decision, went to Emmaus, and while there I had to theoretically collect the syrup, refine it, and then pour it out. So welcome back to Lakeside Church. My name is Jacob. I am the pastor of Next Gen Ministries here, and it's obviously the Sunday after Christmas, so if you don't know, that means that the Next Gen, the youth, the associate pastor is always up here preaching, because Brian's taking a well-deserved week off at this point. And I've titled this morning's message, Pouring into Others, Syrup and Discipleship. And over the course of the next few minutes, and I will try to keep it as close to the time, but I'm taking some of the minutes that Brian shaved off on Christmas services to this morning. Sorry, Brian, you're not here, so you can't stop me. But we're going to be looking at the importance of being mentored and finding someone else to mentor. And this is obviously going to be more targeted towards the Next Gen Ministries, because that's what I spend all of my days thinking about. But the values and the message behind this can be applied to each and every one of us, regardless of the stage in our life. So thank you for joining us. If you want to follow along, there's a few options. First of all, the verses, as always, will be on the screen on either side of me. If you have a paper Bible, you can go ahead and open that up as we go. Or we use the YouVersion Bible app every week. It's a free resource. You can find it on any app store. You download that, you go to the Events tab, and then you can either turn on your locations or just search Lakeside Algoma, and all the verses will be there on your phone. So, I think I got all my stuff done. No, if you're joining via the stream, the verses will be right here. There we go, now we can get in. The first verse we're going to be looking at this morning is Matthew 28, verses 19 through 20, which is the basis for the importance of this discipleship topic. So we're just going to pick it up, and then we'll talk about it. Verse 19 through 20, it says, "Go, therefore, and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. And behold, I am with you always to the end of the age." This chapter is right at the end of the Gospel of Matthew. Jesus was born, as we celebrated on Tuesday. Jesus lived his life. Jesus died. Jesus rose again. He lived on earth again. And then this. This is the last words Jesus said to his disciples and his following before going back up into heaven. And his last message to his followers says, "Go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them and teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you." Or in other words, take what I've taught you and go teach others. And then it says, who is this message for? It says to the nations. Take this to the nations. Go, therefore, and make disciples of all nations, all people, everywhere, all ages. This is a command. Two of the things that drew me to Next Gen Ministry are the impact of my own mentor relationships while growing up, and the fact that if we don't go and don't disciple the younger generations, then the world will. Next Gen Ministry is crucial because the future of our churches, the future of our society, and of Christianity will depend on how well we invest in the next generations. If we don't disciple, if we don't invest, and if we don't equip the younger generations to carry the gospel forward, then who will? And this isn't to say that the gospel is dependent on our actions, because obviously God is over all, God is powerful, God can do what he wants to do, but he put us here with a mission out of Matthew 28 to go and make disciples. And so this isn't to say that the gospel is dependent on us, but rather it's a challenge and a command that we are to be focused on sharing the gospel with the lost, and specifically with the younger generations, because the truth of the matter is, they're going to outlive us. I've always heard, I think I was just talking to someone about this like last Sunday, I've always heard that a church without crying is a church that is dying. A church without crying is a church that is dying. If there's no babies in a church, if there's no one younger in a church, it's a dark way to think about it, but its members will eventually pass away. I will eventually pass away. We will all eventually pass away. And if we all pass away, and don't bring in the next generation, then Lakeside will have to close its doors. And I'm sure we've all seen this. Churches across the nation, across the world, have been too hesitant to change. Churches have been too hesitant to update in order to reach the next generation, and eventually they shrink and they close down because no one's coming in and there's no fruit there. They don't have the younger generations filling the seats, filling the voids left by the older generation. And the fact that older generations, all of us, will move on to eternity should not be cause for worry. It shouldn't make people worry about the future of the church because, again, Christ is over all. But what it should do is give us that challenge and reinforce that we are supposed to go and make disciples of the younger generations. One great biblical example of this discipleship is in Paul and Timothy. Paul and Timothy. Paul was one of the most effective leaders and ministers of the gospel in the early church. The majority of the New Testament letters were written by Paul to different churches or different followers, and there's two of these letters that were written to a guy named Timothy. And while Paul was over all these churches and ministering and missionary work, he still had personal discipleship relationships himself. And one of these was Timothy. And we don't have time to dive into the whole context of their relationship and really dig in there. But what we do know is that through their time spent together, both just doing life and doing ministry together and through intentional teaching, Paul mentored Timothy to replace him and carry on his work. You know, we see in Moses and, oh my gosh, I forgot his name, Joshua, there it is. Sorry, this is not on my notes. This is why I am better at youth group, because they don't care how long I go. Sorry, Brian. But we saw Moses had to disciple Joshua, not just to replace him when the people of Israel were leaving Egypt, but Moses had to disciple and train Joshua to do more. Moses wasn't able to lead the people into the promised land, but Joshua was. So God told Moses, prepare Joshua to do the things that you cannot do. Discipleship and mentorship is not just to make a mini Jacob, or to make a mini Brian, or to make a mini whatever your name is, but it's to make someone who's greater than you, who could do more than you, who's got a better faith, and is stronger, and is more equipped than you ever were. And the letter of 2 Timothy, back to my notes, was Paul's last recorded writing. And Paul was actively in Rome awaiting his execution, because the Romans didn't like that Paul was preaching the gospel. And within this letter were some of his last words to Timothy, whom Paul considered his spiritual son. So as Paul neared his end, he wrote this in 2 Timothy 2, 1 through 3. It says, "You then, my child, be strengthened by the grace that is in Christ Jesus, and what you have heard from me in the presence of many witnesses, entrust to faithful men who will be able to teach others also. Share in suffering as a good teacher of Christ Jesus, good soldier of Christ Jesus." I couldn't read it up there. "Be strengthened by the grace of Jesus and share what I have told you with others who will then go on to teach others." This is discipleship, teaching younger believers who will then go on to teach younger believers than them. And this isn't younger specifically by age. So if you're thinking, oh, I have to go spend time with high schoolers and middle schoolers, no. When I'm saying younger believers, I'm saying people who are spiritually younger than you, people who are newer to the faith. And oftentimes in my context, this is younger kids. This is high schoolers. This is middle schoolers. This is kids. This is littles. But in your context, this might just simply be someone who it's their first time in church, or a family member who hasn't been to church. Or if you've been in church your whole life, find someone who's been there half their life. Teach younger believers who will then go on to teach younger believers, who will then go on to teach more younger believers, and so forth, and it's a cycle that continues if done in a healthy way. Because we can't do it all alone. As Paul said there in verse 3, we're to share in suffering as soldiers of Jesus. We have a mission, but it's not a mission we can do alone. We have fellow soldiers of the faith alongside us. Paul would not have had the same effect on Christianity if he simply tried to do everything himself. Even look at the life of Jesus. Jesus had 12 disciples. One of them kind of turned out to be a dirtbag. But even out of those 12, he had 3 who were his closest disciples, his inner circle, Peter, James, and John. And if Jesus only effectively discipled 11 or 12, depending on the time frame, with an even closer relationship with 3, then how could you attempt to disciple hundreds of people all alone? But luckily for us, we aren't alone. First, we have the assistance of the Holy Spirit. And secondly, we have an army of soldiers for Jesus Christ who we are on mission together to go, therefore, and make disciples of all nations. When we're mentoring younger believers, don't just mentor them to know what you know, but mentor them to know more than you know, and then continue to go on and teach more people. To return to what I said earlier, this discipleship is urgent because if the church is not discipling people, then the world will. I mean, this next generation, I've seen it firsthand, has exponentially more reported cases of mental illness, of drug abuse, of identity issues, of sexual temptations, of bullying, and more and more. And this isn't the fault of the parents per se, or the fault of the church, it's the fault of our technology. You know, technology is a beautiful gift. It's awesome. There's a lot of things we can do. I mean, half of you are reading the Bible on your phones right now, and that's awesome. But what happens if a notification pops up from something you probably shouldn't be looking at? In our pockets, we carry with us a window to the world. It can be used for both good and it can be used for bad. And when the window to the world has direct access to our hearts and to the hearts of our youth, we shouldn't be surprised when we discover the detrimental effects that window into their heart causes. The average youth spends at least 5 hours a day on social media, at least. And this isn't counting texting or playing games or even watching Netflix. This is simply looking at Instagram, looking at X, looking at Facebook, looking at TikTok, whatever the new social media will be when TikTok gets banned in the US within a month. They spend 5 hours looking at what the world presents of their best selves, and that best self that they're looking at, that face-tuned image of someone who isn't even real at this point, is what they view as necessary to be loved, to be desired, an unnecessary thing to be acquired in order to be cared for, to feel loved, and to feel like part of something greater than themselves. And this isn't just a youth problem, but rather social media addiction and comparison on social media is an issue that almost all of us probably have faced in some way or another. Parents included, me included. According to a report from Hofstra University, I like that name, the youth of today are 3 times more likely to consider or attempt suicide, with only 45% saying that they are in a good mental state, more often than not. 45% saying they're in a good mental state more often than not. That means 55% of under 18, if you ask them on a regular day, are more likely to say they're depressed than they're happy. And with numbers this high, it's impossible to ignore all the studies that the direct correlation between social media connection and the lack of true joy and happiness. And again, I'm not saying all social media is bad. I use it regularly. That's how I connect with our students. I post our events. I post all this stuff on Facebook for Lakeside. Half of you wouldn't know what's going on if you didn't look at Facebook. And that's okay. But there's a correlation here between being too connected virtually and not connected enough in real life. And what's the core issue there? This next generation needs to feel loved, to feel cared for, to feel like a part of something bigger than themselves, something bigger than their everyday lives of going to school, going to work, going home, doing their chores, playing with their dog, helping their little sister, doing whatever. Because as humans, we long for connection and community, and we long for purpose. But with the rise of technology, while we're more digitally connected than ever before, we lose a sense of actual connection. You know, I have a good handful of friends that I only know through online relationships. My wife, Janessa, just went on a trip with a bunch of her online friends, and they had a great time. And so I'm not saying that online people and online connections are fake. But the fact of the matter is that if those relationships don't translate into a real, vulnerable, in-person connection, then you have no way of knowing who that person on the other end of the phone actually is. We crave meaningful relationships. We crave vulnerability. We crave someone who we can cheer with, as well as someone who can be there for us when we need cheering up. All of my favorite memories with my close friends have been when we're together, doing something, in person. We have a lot of fun playing video games. I mean, me and all my pastor buddies, we went to college, and then we spread out. And that's how we stay in touch. We play video games, and we talk about life. We talk about ministry. Every Wednesday night after youth group, I go home and I talk to my buddy Nolan. We debrief the night together. And it's awesome. I love that. But it is not as vulnerable and it is not as connected as if we were in person having those same conversations. This generation is the most connected to the outside world of any other generation, yet they don't feel happy. They don't feel loved. And they don't feel like they belong or have a purpose beyond posting the best edited photos. And what's missing in their life is this real, vulnerable relationship and a hope beyond their phone. A hope beyond college, a hope beyond relationships, a hope beyond a job, a hope beyond what they can grasp on their own. And what this next generation needs, and by parallelism, what everyone in this room needs and everyone in your lives needs, is someone who can mentor them and help them grow toward the person they were made to be by pointing them to the person who made them. Because only when they have a relationship with the God who created heaven and earth, created everything we see, but more importantly, created each and every hair on your head, will they ever feel that sense of belonging and purpose that they so desperately need. But before we can mentor the younger generation, before we can mentor younger believers, we ourselves need to be mentored and we need to grow. We read in Luke 6, 39 through 40, he also told them a parable. Can a blind man lead a blind man? Will they not both fall into a pit? A disciple is not above his teacher, but everyone when he is fully trained will be like his teacher. Jesus here is telling his followers a few parables and asks them a simple question. He asks, can a blind man lead a blind man? Or in other words, how can someone who doesn't know anything tell someone else about that topic? I mean, if I came in here and tried to run a seminar on aerospace engineering, why are you here? I know nothing about aerospace engineering. I could tell you plane go up and plane go down. And if we tried to build an airplane, chances are either it wouldn't get off the ground, or if by some gust of wind we do get off the ground, I don't think you're going to like the landing very much. Because I know nothing about airplanes. In verse 40, Jesus says, a disciple is not above his teacher, but everyone, when he is fully trained, will be like his teacher. It should be our goal to learn from a gifted teacher and be trained to be like that teacher, to then go on and train and teach others, continuing this cycle. Then we jump down a few verses, and it tells us why it's important to be trained and taught. Verses 43 through 45, for no good tree bears bad fruit, nor again does a bad tree bear good fruit. For each tree is known by its own fruit. For figs are not gathered from thorn bushes, nor are grapes picked from a bramble bush. The good person out of the good treasure of his heart produces good, and the evil person out of the evil treasure produces evil. For out of the abundance of the heart his mouth speaks. No good tree bears bad fruit, and no bad tree bears good fruit. If you want to see how prepared you are, what your roots are, and if you are a good or bad tree, look at your fruit. This is a concept in Jeff Vanderstell's book, Gospel Frequency, which I quote way too often in student ministry. And he tells the reader to work fruit to root in order to diagnose their spiritual health. To work fruit to root. Every action we do, every fruit that we produce, reflects a deeper truth we believe about God and about his presence in our lives. He tells us that the roots of our faith produce the fruit of our life. Let me say that again. The roots of our faith produce the fruit of our life. He describes a series of 4 questions to ask yourself in order to discover the root of your fruit. First, what am I doing or experiencing right now? Then, in light of what I'm doing or experiencing, what do I believe about myself? Third, what do I believe God is doing or has done? And last, what do I believe God is like? If we do not believe that God is faithful, if our root is that his promises aren't true, then we won't believe God has kept his promises, which will make us question our salvation and our faith, which will lead us to the fruit of doubt, all because we don't believe that God is faithful. To find why we're doubting, find where your root is. In terms of discipleship, if you're not seeing the fruits of your relationship with Christ reflected in your relationship with those younger in the faith, then you need to examine your roots. If I am not discipling well, then what's wrong with my roots? Do you believe the gospel is just for you? Is that your root? Or do you believe that God has given you the ability and the command to mentor those younger in the faith? A believer who is not telling other people about Jesus is not following the commands of the gospel as laid out throughout Jesus' teaching, and specifically in Matthew 28. It says, go hide. Matthew 28 does not say go hide in your room and learn about Jesus from others just to then make yourself smarter. This is one of the worst parts about going to Bible college, is that you begin to look at this book, you begin to look at your relationship with Christ almost as a textbook at times. And you begin to think, okay, what do I need to learn from this so I can get smarter and pass my classes? And that is wrong. Bible college is great, but that is one of the biggest traps I've seen some of my classmates fall into. Matthew 28 says, go, make disciples, teach them to follow everything that you have learned. Don't just learn and then hide that fruit, but give it to others. What is your fruit? If you're not obeying Christ's mission of evangelism and discipleship, then you need to find where in your root that disconnect has happened. What you do matters, and whether or not we were discipling the younger generations of believers matters. Because if we don't, number one, we're disobeying Christ's command to us. Not a good thing to do. And number two, if we aren't training them, then who is? You can't complain about a generation that doesn't know the gospel and is fully absorbed in their phone if you're not making it your mission to love them and train them in the way that they should go. But don't just do it out of obligation, there we go, but do it out of the love of Christ that he has given to you. Reflect the love that Christ has shown to you onto others. Because if I'm being honest, I could not love half the students very well if I was doing it on my own strength. I love them. I love them. But they get on my nerves sometimes. And that's part of discipleship, is knowing that Christ is what's guiding those relationships. It's not something you're doing on your own. I use a phrase while training my volunteers that I heard from one of my mentors, and that phrase is that kids don't care what you know until they know that you care. Kids don't care what you know until they know that you care. If the kids don't feel like they actually know you, and if you are not caring for the younger believers, then why are they going to listen to you? If someone walked in to have a deep meeting with Brian, but then Brian's on his phone the whole time, do you think what Brian has to say would be heard? But I've seen Brian have deep meetings. The truth is, I've seen countless people go in and out of Brian's office. Everyone knows where my desk is. I don't have an office. I'm just kind of chilling. And so I see everyone who walks in, and then I see them when they walk out. And I could tell you beyond a shadow of a doubt that everyone who walks in that office, whether they're happy or whether they're having the worst day of their life, that when they walk out, they have felt loved and they have felt cared for. And that's not because of Brian. That's because of the love of Christ reflected through Brian. And because of the love of Christ that Brian has experienced, he is able to love and nurture each and every one of those people who walk in and out of that office day in and day out. In order to mentor and disciple people, we have to love them with the same love that Christ has loved us. I was just having lunch with a student recently, and as the conversation was shifting to heavier topics, I told him that I didn't really care what other people were doing. I honestly didn't really care what he had done. But what I cared about was how it was affecting him and how he was doing. Because the truth of the matter is, everyone has a truth. I know that it always lies somewhere in the middle between the two sides. But when you're mentoring, when you're discipling someone, yes, you need to hold them accountable to what the gospel tells us to do, but you need to love them. And this is the energy that I needed when I was in high school. I needed and craved someone who would let me talk and open up about what was going on in my life without fear of what they would do with that information and without fear of judgment. What I was craving and what I teach all of my mentors or all of my leaders to do is to love the students, support the students, care for the students, keep things they tell you confidential within reason, obviously, but don't just say, oh, you shouldn't do that, like, oh, you're doing a good job, buddy. Hold them accountable to what God has told them to do in a loving way. And that is who I strive to be. That's who I train my leaders to be, because that is important. Students won't care what you know until they know that you care. And the most important growth that happens in each and every one of our lives is in a personal relationship with someone. Half of you won't remember what I said up here after lunch. 90% of you won't remember what I said up here in 2 months. You remember I was here? But this is something Brian and I both recognize. That while what we say up here is important, and we make sure it's biblical and it's true, what's more important is that you feel loved, and you feel connected, and you feel able to open up and talk about what's going on in your lives with everyone on staff here. Because the love of Christ reflected through us will do more growth for you than coming up and sitting here for 52 sermons a year. My goal in ministry is to be the person I needed when I was growing up. And this isn't to say that I lacked mentors later on or that I lack mentors now, but I needed mentors who wanted what was best for me, even when it wasn't what I wanted. And additionally, I still talk to several of these guys weekly, just to catch up, celebrate victories, and to diagnose things that went wrong and how to fix them. So all this talk, as my time is technically running up, about the importance of discipleship, especially in next-gen ministry, is great, but you might be wondering, what is the point for me? First of all, get yourself a mentor. Find someone who can walk alongside you through the highs and the lows of life, to hold you to the gospel, to love you, to care for you, to support you, but to train you in what Christ tells you to do. You can't lead someone unless you yourself have been led. A blind man cannot lead a blind man. Grow in your own faith and your own knowledge of Christ, and then go out and mentor a younger believer. Second, for any parents in the audience, honestly, if you feel like I'm looking at you half the time, I can't see you because I'm a little taller than Brian, and the lights are adjusted to him. So that's why I'm always squinting up here. Second, for any parents in the audience, I want to let you know that the goal of Lakeside's Next Gen Ministries is to walk alongside of you, not to take your role. Christian growth is the requirement and the responsibility of the parents. Lakeside's Next Gen Ministry is not to take that away from you, but rather to be a tool and to be a help in any way that we can. So if there's anything that you guys need assistance or help with, just let me know, and we'll figure out how I can help you. Third, as we as a church, whether it's down the hall on Sunday mornings or on Wednesday nights at the youth club, we try to make an engaging and innovative and safe environment in which the next generation can grow. Because we want them to be safe, we want them to want to be there, and we want them to feel loved. Our kids' church program, just to clear any misconceptions, it's not just babysitting. Whether they're in littles or kids, they're not just hanging out playing Monopoly. What happens in those rooms, I would not do this job if I didn't care about what happened down there. I am not a babysitter. My wife is a nanny, but I am not a babysitter. I am not a nanny. I am not just going to hang out. What we do down there is we have fun. But more importantly, we start the growth. We place building blocks for your child's faith, whether it's there or if you're a student. We teach them who Jesus is, and we show them what it means to grow and walk alongside them. Next, as I said earlier, find yourself a mentor. And then once you're growing, find someone who you can help grow. The best growth, as I said, happens in intimate, personal, vulnerable, one-on-one conversations with someone else. Titus 2 talks all about how older men and women are supposed to model what it means to live above reproach and to follow Christ, while teaching younger men and women how to live as a believer. Older generations need to feel empowered, and they need to be willing to invest in, both spiritually and just relationally, with the younger generations, not just in word, but in action. And this isn't me telling you that you need to volunteer in all of our ministries, because, if you feel so led, come talk to me. We're always growing, and we always need more leaders. But not each and every one of you is a good fit for that program. And you know that, and I know that. But if you want to disciple, and you want to mentor, and you want to lead the younger generations, it starts in simple ways. It starts in making church a priority. If you want your kid, or you want other students in Lakeside to make church a priority, then you got to get dressed. You got to wake up and then get dressed. Then come to church on Sunday morning. Even if you're out late the last night, even if the Packers are playing later. I always know when there's a Packers game because there's way too much yellow and green in here for a Bears fan. And there goes the message. But if you want your students, or you want other students to prioritize church, you need to make it a point in your weekly schedule to get here and fully invest in what's going on. If you want your kids or the students of Lakeside to fully embrace worshiping God without shame, then why are you checking your phone during worship? If you want the next generation to sing their praises to God because he sent his son to die and rise again for us, then why aren't you singing? Modeling Christ-likeness does not always need a close relationship with a student. It's something that we should all be doing because they are watching. When I was a kid in church, I always realized who was there some weeks and who was there every week. I was that awkward kid sitting in the pew and looking behind me. I knew who was singing and who wasn't. I knew who was on their phone and who wasn't. I knew who was there, and I knew who wasn't. And I promise you, more than noticing what other people at my church were doing, I noticed what my parents were doing. If my parents thought it was important to learn and grow, then I learned it was important to learn and grow. If you want the next generation to continue to follow Christ and keep the church vibrant and life-changing for future generations, then you have a responsibility to these kids here and now to show up, to make an effort, to focus and make your priority following Christ. Show them what that means. Show them what it means to be committed to a church. Show them what it means to serve, to love, to welcome. Show them what it means to call yourself a Christian, whether in person, in mentorship, or even online. Students, I remember doing this when I was a student. Students notice when you're swearing on Facebook. Students notice when you share a thirst trap to your Instagram story. And more importantly than the students noticing, God notices. And not only does he notice what you're doing, but he's noticing that you're not acting worthy of the call that Christ has placed on your life, and you're not following the commands to teach and train the younger believers in the way that they should go. So as we're rounding the corner on my time, way over time, what am I saying? Discipleship is important, and it isn't optional. One of my favorite movies of all time is Gladiator. It's got Russell Crowe. It's got Joaquin Phoenix. It's great. I love the Roman Empire. But Russell Crowe's character, Maximus, who was once a Roman general and then got ousted, and ends up as a gladiator, training and fighting his way back to get revenge for the slaughter of his family. Don't watch it unless your parents say you can. It's very bloody. But his character says several times throughout the movie, what we do in life echoes in eternity. And obviously, Maximus was not a Christian. But we are on earth for such a short period of time in the light of eternity, and we can't take that time for granted. What we do with our lives matters. What we do in life echoes in eternity, so we need to be growing personally, and we need to be helping younger believers grow as well. Discipleship is a God-given command, not just something to check off a to-do list, but it's an important aspect of the Christian walk. You need to be mentored. And then once you're strong in your own faith and strong in your own knowledge, you need to go out and find someone to mentor. Think back to my syrup story. This was such a small moment in the life of Tyler. But for me, it has fundamentally changed and shaped my future. I haven't talked to Tyler in probably 3 years. He doesn't know that I'm talking about him. But through that conversation, I realized where I was going. I realized what I had to do to get there. I pulled a few important tie-ins. First, when looking for someone to mentor, you can't choose everyone. When you're looking for a tree to tap, you have to choose the ones that look ready to put out good sap. You can't tap every tree because that would be too much work, and you have to tap the trees carefully because some trees just won't give you any sap, and some won't give you good enough sap to turn into syrup. When you're looking for someone to disciple, don't just start tapping everyone on the shoulder. Look for someone who you think you could form a good and beneficial relationship with, who has good growth potential. Don't just water a rock, water a plant that has potential to build roots. Second, it takes time and energy to refine syrup, or to refine sap into syrup. When you begin a mentorship, don't expect it to be quick and easy. It's hard to open up and share real life stuff with your mentor. And just like that, it's hard for people to open up and share real life stuff with you. These things don't happen overnight, and they take time and effort and consistency and grace and a whole lot of the love of Christ. Take the time to boil off the surface impurities so that you can get to the deep stuff. And then even after you finish boiling off all the water, you're still going to have to strain it, and you're still going to have to pack it. But once your syrup is ready, once this messy, difficult process is ready and done, your syrup is ready to be made and enjoyed. You don't hide syrup in your basement. You have to pour it out of your vats, and you have to put it into bottles so that you can give it to people and sell it and spread it around so other people can enjoy the syrup that you spent so much time making. If you only teach someone but you never prepare to send them out, you're missing that final crucial part in the process. Once you spend the time teaching and growing someone, you need to actually send them in. That doesn't mean that you stop meeting them, but you swap your meetings from teaching them what it means to be a Christian to teaching them what it means to be a mentor. If we as the church fail to prepare the next generation, then we have failed not just this generation, but every subsequent generation as well. Last verse, and then we're done. Romans 10:14-15 says, "How will they call on him in whom they have not believed? And how are they to believe in him of whom they have not heard? And how are they to hear without someone preaching?" If we don't teach the next generation, then they will not believe. And if they don't believe, then they can't go on to preach and teach more generations. The challenge is there for all of us to inspire and train this next generation, and the only God-honoring, Christ-following response we can have is to obey and say, "Yes, Lord, I will disciple." If you're looking for a way to get into this easily, come talk to me. We might have a spot for you in the Next Gen Ministries. Whether that's a hands-on role or simply as simple as committing to pray for the students or bring meals for the students, there's ways that you can help the next generation that don't require you to be there every Wednesday night. And then your mentorship does not have to be with the next generation, just simply with a younger believer. And if it's Christ's will for our lives, then we shouldn't hide from that responsibility. Obviously, New Year's Day is on Wednesday. Most of us are probably going to make some form of, I'm going to get in better shape, I'm going to be kinder to my spouse, I'm going to wake up earlier, something like that that's going to fail in about 5 days. And then inevitably you'll be disappointed in yourself and wait to try again until next year. And if that describes you, start your goal today, first of all. Don't wait till an arbitrary day on the calendar to start improving yourself. And when you fail, keep trying, just general. But how about instead of these typical goals, make a goal of finding a mentor. Go up to someone who you respect and say, hey, will you mentor me? And then once you're growing, talk with your mentor and have them let you know when they think you're ready to go and train up a younger believer. Make it your goal this year to grow in faith and show others what it means to follow Christ, because what we do with our life matters. And what we do with our life can change the lives of those around us. Let's pray. Lord God, thank you for this morning. Thank you for the fact that you sent your Son to die on the cross for us. Lord, I pray that we would accept this challenge of going and training the younger believers. Help us to follow you in every area of our lives and model what it means to proclaim your name. Bless us this week. Bring us back next Sunday as Brian kicks off his new series. It's in your name we pray.